pregnant wife crawled to the hospital alone. The millionaire was on a yacht with his mistress. A drenched phone buzzing on the kitchen table, a half-packed hospital bag kicked into a corner, and a pregnant woman on her hands and knees, gasping for air, struggling to reach the door. Across the city skyline, her husband, millionaire mogul Andrew Moretti, raises a glass of champagne aboard a luxurious yacht, a smug smile dancing across his lips. Oblivious to his wife's agony, he stands surrounded by enablers and, most notably, his alluring mistress. How did a once blissful marriage unravel into this harrowing scene? Buckle up for a roller coaster of betrayal, heartbreak, and fierce resilience that will leave you questioning every loyalty and vow. Michelle Patterson felt tears pooling in the corners of her eyes as she stared across the dinner table. It was their second wedding anniversary, and the private rooftop of the famed Pierre Hotel in Manhattan glowed with fairy lights and candles. Andrew Moretti, her husband, had just finished a phone call that lasted no more than 30 seconds, but the tension it left behind stretched on for minutes. The night was supposed to be perfect. Andrew had insisted on paying top dollar for an intimate, high-end chef's tasting menu. Michelle wore her favorite burgundy gown, carefully selecting every piece of jewelry to show just how deeply she cared for the celebration. But Andrew seemed distant. Yes, he was dressed to the nines, exuding confidence in his tailored tuxedo. Yes, he smiled and reached for her hand across the table. But behind that polite gesture lurked a certain restlessness she couldn't quite name. Still, she pushed away the unease. When Andrew proposed a toast, Michelle's heart fluttered. He raised his champagne flute, although they both knew Michelle was nearly 2 months pregnant by then, and she could only sip sparkling water and began to speak in a soft but poised voice. He recounted how they met at a business convention in Denver, how he had been instantly drawn to her warmth and sincerity. He declared that the future was bright. In that moment, Michelle allowed herself to believe him. At the end of the toast, Andrew dug into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. Inside was a stunning necklace, a rose gold chain with a delicately carved heart-shaped pendant, studded with tiny diamonds. Michelle gasped, overwhelmed with both awe and an unshakable hint of anxiety. Had he gifted her this lavish piece to apologize for something she didn't yet know? She pushed the thought away. She let the romantic evening sink into her heart. Andrew enveloped her hand in his. Their gazes locked, and for a fleeting moment, the world felt as if it was theirs to conquer. Michelle whispered a heartfelt thank you. Little did she know how soon that cherished memory would warp into something twisted, a veneer of happiness, hiding secrets that would tear her life apart. Michelle's background could not be more different from Andrew's. Raised in a cozy suburb of Boston, Michelle was nurtured by 2 loving parents, her father a hard-working electrician, her mother a devoted elementary school teacher. She spent her weekends volunteering at the local animal shelter, her nights studying under a single reading lamp in the small bedroom she shared with a younger sister, Amy. She grew up believing in the power of genuine connection, kindness, and dreams built from the ground up. It was that unwavering faith that carried her to a scholarship at Boston College, where she studied communications. Upon graduation, Michelle landed a junior position in a PR agency in Denver. She excelled quickly, forging strong relationships with clients and impressing her bosses with her sincerity and sharp mind. Andrew, by contrast, was born into a world of expensive summer camps and luxury ski trips. His father, Richard Moretti, owned a lucrative chain of auto dealerships across New England. Money flowed easily in the Moretti household. Ambition was an inheritance. Andrew's mother, Elizabeth Moretti, managed various charity foundations, though rumors often whispered that her philanthropic endeavors were more about social status than altruism. When Andrew took over the family business after his father's retirement, he quickly expanded into real estate and high-end art investments. He was not merely a trust fund baby. He possessed a keen eye for deals and a magnetic charm that opened boardroom doors. By the time he met Michelle at that Denver convention, he was on the brink of launching a new tech startup that would eventually turn him into a multi-millionaire almost overnight. They met in a corridor lined with promotional banners for keynote speakers. Andrew, freshly off delivering a talk about entrepreneurial risk-taking, was flocked by admirers. Michelle was headed to the restroom when she accidentally caught his eye. Their conversation began with a joke about how crowded the event was, and something in Andrew's demeanor made Michelle stop. For the next 2 hours, they chatted at a coffee table in the lounge, oblivious to the bustling crowd around them. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was something close. They shared stories about childhood, life goals, and dreams for the future. When Andrew asked her out to dinner that very evening, Michelle's heart fluttered. In a whirlwind of romance and possibilities, they went from perfect strangers to an inseparable duo. For a long while, it seemed like a dream come true. In the earlier days of marriage, Michelle had never doubted Andrew's devotion. They moved to a chic penthouse in Manhattan's Upper East Side, a place boasting floor-to-ceiling windows and an uninterrupted view of Central Park. The breathtaking vista symbolized the open expanse of their future, a life brimming with promise and success. During their first year together, Andrew worked hard, sometimes late into the evening. Michelle, building her own PR consulting firm, often joined him for business dinners and galas. She would stand proudly by his side, hand in hand, while he closed deals and made vital connections. His social network was staggering: real estate tycoons, venture capitalists, CEOs of global brands. Notably, he struck up a business friendship with Mark Cuban at a charity auction. Andrew's star was on the rise, and everyone wanted to bask in his glow. Yet Michelle noticed subtle changes. The more Andrew's net worth grew, the more she spotted tiny cracks in his persona. His sense of self-importance started to overshadow the gentler qualities that had first drawn her to him. He became more image-conscious, always concerned about being seen at the right events or wearing the right designer suit. Perhaps these were small quirks that came with wealth, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. One evening, after a marathon day at work, Michelle found Andrew engrossed in his laptop. His eyes flicked up when she entered the room, but quickly darted back to the screen. She tried to engage him in conversation about their upcoming trip to see her parents in Boston, but Andrew mumbled an indifferent response. Later that night, she discovered that Andrew had cancelled their Boston trip without telling her. Instead, he scheduled a last-minute business retreat in the Hamptons. When confronted, he brushed it aside as just business and insisted she could still go visit her parents alone. Michelle felt a pang of disappointment, but tried to rationalize it. Andrew's success was vital for both of them, wasn't it? It was the first time she sensed real distance between them. He used to move mountains to be at her side. Now, his eyes were always scanning for something else, some better opportunity or bigger deal. Unknown to her, Andrew was also beginning to mix in new circles, ones where marriage vows were considered more ornamental than binding. This was the start of the emotional drift that would push them to the brink. A year before Michelle became pregnant, Andrew decided to expand his horizons beyond real estate and tech startups. He invested in an exclusive yacht club membership in Southampton. The lavishness astounded even him, a place where billionaires moored their floating palaces, where champagne was served like water, and where every day felt like a scene out of The Great Gatsby. Michelle, not fond of deep waters or ostentatious displays of wealth, attended a few yacht parties to support Andrew. She'd wear a summery, modest sundress, while the other women strutted in designer bikinis. Under the blazing sun, she found herself overshadowed by the outlandish extravagance helicopters sometimes landed on the largest yachts just to drop off more bottles of Dom Perignon. It was during one of these gatherings that Michelle first heard the name Harriet Caldwell. She was standing by the refreshment table, trying to navigate casual small talk with a group of people she barely knew. They were all finance moguls or heirs to old money fortunes. Harriet was introduced in passing, her name accompanied by hushed comments. A tall, leggy blonde with a penchant for red lipstick and short dresses, Harriet was rumoured to be quite influential in social circles. Some whispered she was a cunning investor, others claimed she was a social climber who latched onto wealthy men. Michelle had no reason to suspect Harriet of anything at first. She only noticed that Harriet seemed to circle near Andrew at these gatherings, always greeting him with a bright grin, always dressed to kill. Harriet seemed to know precisely how to angle her head, how to lean in during conversation, how to laugh at Andrew's jokes. Michelle brushed it off. Harriet was likely just another socialite. But one evening, as she was tidying the penthouse after Andrew had come home and hopped into the shower, Michelle noticed his phone screen lit up. A single message notification popped. Harriet Caldwell. The text read, "Can't wait to see you again soon." Confused, Michelle felt her heart skip a beat. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe Harriet was part of a bigger investment circle or a networking event. She couldn't ignore the warning glimmer in her mind, though. Andrew had never mentioned Harriet outside of yacht gatherings. Why would Harriet be texting him about a private meetup? The seeds of suspicion were planted deep within Michelle's heart. She desperately wanted to trust her husband. Yet this name Harriet would soon become an omen that haunted her. Amid growing unease, a ray of hope illuminated Michelle's world. She discovered she was pregnant. It happened on a rainy Monday morning. She had been feeling inexplicably tired for weeks, her usual vigor replaced by occasional bouts of nausea. Curious, she took a home pregnancy test. The moment she saw the faint pink line, her pulse soared. She glanced at herself in the bathroom mirror, tears forming. A child, a living symbol of love between her and Andrew. In that instant, her uncertainties receded. She rushed to Andrew's home office, cradling the positive test like it was the most precious secret on earth. Andrew's reaction was unexpectedly subdued. "Yes," he smiled, even lifted her off her feet in a half-spin that made her giggle, but there was a brief flicker in his eyes, something akin to panic. Michelle chose to dismiss it, clinging to the moment of joy. She told herself he was simply overwhelmed by the life-changing news. To her relief, over the next weeks, Andrew showed glimmers of his old self. He accompanied her to the initial doctor's appointment at Mount Sinai Hospital, sat with her during the ultrasound, and even offered to clear some space in his schedule for parenting classes. His supportive front warmed Michelle's heart. Their arguments about cancelled plans and suspicious phone calls faded into the background. Shortly after, they held a small gathering at the penthouse for close friends. Everyone congratulated them, praising them as a power couple who seemed to have it all: wealth, success, and now the promise of a baby. Michelle's eyes shone with happiness as she placed a protective hand on her still flat stomach. That evening, they curled up on the couch together after the guests had left. Andrew gently rested his head on her shoulder. For a fleeting moment, it felt like everything would be all right. Michelle whispered how excited she was to bring a child into the world, to watch them grow, to create a loving family. Andrew nodded, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. But late that night, when Michelle woke up thirsty, she noticed Andrew wasn't in bed. She ventured out to the living room and found him in a tense phone conversation. She caught only a few words. "Yes, Harriet. No, she doesn't suspect anything. We'll meet soon." Michelle retreated before Andrew noticed her presence, her heart pounding. So Harriet was still on his mind, and the storm of doubt began brewing once more. Michelle could no longer ignore the tension roiling beneath their everyday exchanges. Her pregnancy progressed, the joyful swirl of hormones and anticipation mixing with anxiety that clawed at her peace of mind. At 14 weeks, she started showing a small bump, and Andrew's presence in the penthouse became fleeting. He claimed it was an intensely busy period for his startup. Meetings with potential European investors, dinners with business partners from Silicon Valley. Michelle tried to be understanding. It was normal for entrepreneurs to hustle, especially at a critical juncture of a growing venture. Yet, the frequency of Andrew's late-night returns, or sometimes staying out until morning, wore down her patience and trust. One Sunday, she attempted to plan a quiet brunch and an afternoon to shop for baby essentials. Andrew agreed in principle, but woke up restless and left after receiving a phone call. Michelle stood alone in the foyer, keys in hand, tears burning in her eyes. She placed her palm on her belly, silently apologizing to the tiny life for the emotional turmoil swirling in the house. Her PR business also demanded attention. Her clients included a boutique fashion label in Soho and a charity foundation run by the acclaimed journalist Anderson Cooper. While Michelle tried to remain professional, her mind often drifted to Andrew. Could he really be having an affair? Was Harriet more than just a casual acquaintance? In quiet moments, Michelle recalled a time when Andrew would call or text throughout the day, check in about her mood, or share jokes to keep her smiling. Now, a day could pass without a single personal message. Whenever she confronted Andrew about Harriet or the suspicious phone calls, he dismissed them as business negotiations. She wanted to believe him. She wanted so badly to salvage the marriage for the sake of their unborn child, but the nagging sense of betrayal grew stronger. She even considered hiring a private investigator, but feared what she might discover. During a routine prenatal checkup, Dr. Hoffman at Mount Sinai Hospital reminded her to stay stress-free. Elevated anxiety could complicate the pregnancy, and Michelle, well aware, forced a smile. She decided to speak openly, telling Andrew how vital it was for them to attend counseling or at least have an honest conversation. But Andrew sidestepped the discussion, always too busy, too tired, or too preoccupied with urgent business matters. And still, Harriet's name lingered in the corners of Michelle's mind, like a ghost haunting a once happy home. The turning point arrived on a chilly evening in late autumn. Michelle was tidying Andrew's study, something she did less frequently now, since Andrew had become oddly protective of his workspace. Yet, the desk was cluttered, and the mess annoyed her. Moving aside a stack of glossy brochures for luxury yachts, her eyes landed on a folded letter bearing Harriet Caldwell's signature. Curiosity and dread collided. She considered ignoring it, but the fear that Harriet represented something more than business overcame her. With trembling hands, she opened the letter. It was short, handwritten in elegant cursive. Andrew, thank you for the unforgettable weekend in Monaco. Looking forward to our next adventure. Maybe the Greek Isles? I'll handle everything if you just say the word. Harriet Michelle's mind whirled. Weekend in Monaco. He had told her he was in London meeting with potential investors that weekend. Her breath quickened, tears pricking her eyes. Suddenly, the illusions she'd clung to that Harriet might simply be a business contact shattered. She stood in the study, letter in hand, heart pounding like a drum. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet, a sensation of betrayal that made her want to scream. Memories reeled through her mind. The subtle changes in Andrew's demeanor, the late-night phone calls, Harriet's flirty presence at the yacht club. Andrew walked in moments later, briefcase in hand. He froze upon seeing Michelle's tear-streaked face, the letter clutched in her shaking fingers. For a second, neither spoke. The silence crackled with a rage and hurt so thick it threatened to suffocate them both. Michelle confronted him, demanding to know how long this had been happening. Andrew hesitated, then spouted some half-baked explanation about how Harriet was merely a business acquaintance who enjoyed extravagant trips. He said it was purely work-related travel, an invitation he couldn't refuse. Michelle wasn't buying it. She threw the letter at him, accusing him of betrayal. Andrew, uncharacteristically flustered, responded with anger. He lashed out that Michelle was being irrational, that her pregnancy hormones made her paranoid. The fight escalated until Michelle collapsed onto the nearest chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Andrew stormed out, slamming the penthouse door behind him. In that echo, Michelle felt a chasm open within her. The man she loved, the father of her unborn child, had chosen to share intimate weekends with another woman. The reality was impossible to deny. Her marriage was in tatters. After that explosive confrontation, Andrew didn't return for 3 days. Michelle's phone calls and texts went unanswered. She contacted his closest friend, Daniel Reyes, someone who had been Andrew's college roommate, and remained a confidant. Daniel claimed ignorance of Andrew's whereabouts, though Michelle sensed he was covering for him. Michelle spent those days wavering between fury, despair, and a surprising sense of resolve. Her baby bump was more prominent now, and she felt fluttering kicks, a reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself, but for the innocent life growing inside her. Each morning she woke up praying Andrew would walk through the door, apologize, and vow to fix everything. Each night she sank into bed with the same hollow disappointment. When Andrew finally reappeared, he brought with him a barrage of excuses. He'd stayed at a friend's luxury penthouse in Midtown to clear his head. He claimed Harriet had nothing to do with it, but Michelle no longer trusted his words. The heartbreak etched into her face should have moved Andrew to immediate remorse, but instead he remained aloof, even irritated by her tears. That evening, Michelle insisted they talk about boundaries, therapy, and how they'd move forward as co-parents, if nothing else. Andrew nodded absently, scrolling through his phone. Suddenly, a message lit up his screen, Harriet's name again. A wave of nausea hit Michelle. How could he be so brazen, so cold? The conversation escalated into a searing argument that resulted in Andrew storming out once more. Days turned into weeks, and the cycle repeated. He'd return sporadically to the penthouse, always with the same mechanical apologies, but never offering true honesty. He threw money at the situation, insisting Michelle treat herself to high-end maternity wear from brands like Hatch and Seraphine, booking her spa appointments at the Mandarin Oriental. But what she craved was his presence, his support, his love. Friends started noticing Michelle's disheveled appearance and forced smiles. Her mother, visiting from Boston, gently pressed about the tension. But Michelle refused to confide the full truth, fearing the shame and heartbreak that would follow. Sometimes, as she walked by Andrew's empty study, she would pause at the door, remembering better days. The laughter they once shared felt like it belonged to another lifetime. She told herself she would fight for her marriage a little longer for the baby's sake, but somewhere deep within, she suspected the war was already lost. Harriet Caldwell was no longer a whispered name, but a public fixture on Andrew's arm. Gossipy tabloids and social media accounts followed the city's elite and began to feature photos of Andrew and Harriet attending charity galas, exclusive yacht parties, and even fashion events. Michelle would discover these images in the most painful ways, sometimes forwarded by a concerned friend, sometimes appearing unbidden in her newsfeed. In one particularly galling article, Andrew was photographed stepping off a private jet at Teterboro Airport. Harriet exited right behind him, wearing oversized sunglasses and a triumphant smirk. The headlines speculated about Andrew's failing marriage. Michelle was rarely seen in public by then, her pregnancy nearing the final trimester. Michelle confronted Andrew again and again, each time growing more desperate. Could he really parade Harriet around so shamelessly? His responses vacillated between dismissive sneers, accusing Michelle of dramatizing the situation, and half-hearted claims that Harriet was merely a business ally. However, the evidence to the contrary towered like an insurmountable wall. As if the betrayal weren't enough, Harriet began to send thinly veiled taunts to Michelle. Mysterious gifts arrived at the penthouse door, expensive items like Hermes scarves, each attached to a cryptic note signed from Harriet with admiration. Perhaps Harriet intended these gifts as some twisted courtesy, or maybe she reveled in tormenting the pregnant wife. Either way, Michelle felt violated, as though Harriet was staking a claim on Andrew with each new gesture. Andrew's financial empire continued to flourish. He secured a major deal involving a luxury resort chain in the Maldives. To celebrate, Harriet hosted a lavish yacht party in the New York harbor. Michelle heard about it through an acquaintance, who sent her a sympathetic text reading, "I'm so sorry you have to go through this." The pictures from the event showed Andrew and Harriet clinking champagne flutes at sunset, gazing at each other in a way that made Michelle's skin crawl. Michelle found herself standing before the mirror in her bedroom, staring at the reflection of a woman she barely recognized. Her face was puffy from crying, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She pressed a hand against her swollen belly, trying to summon any shred of hope. She wanted to believe Andrew would wake from this delusion, realize the damage he was causing, and return to the family he had vowed to protect. But every new photograph, every new rumor, only deepened the chasm between them. The marriage had become a spectacle of heartbreak and betrayal for all to see. By the time Michelle reached her 8th month of pregnancy, she felt emotionally battered. Andrew's fleeting visits were marked by tension, arguments, and a suffocating sense of defeat. Each time he left, she wondered if he would bother returning at all. The financial aspect of their relationship complicated everything. The penthouse, her medical bills at Mount Sinai, her entire business, much of it, was tied to Andrew's financial resources. While she had some savings from her PR firm, it paled in comparison to the towering lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. More importantly, she felt pinned by the looming medical costs of giving birth in a city as expensive as New York. In a moment of vulnerability, she called her mother and finally let out the truth. Her mother's horrified silence spoke volumes, followed by tearful promises to help however she could, but her parents' modest pension and savings hardly seemed enough. Friends advised her to seek a divorce lawyer, but the thought of a lengthy legal battle while heavily pregnant overwhelmed her. In a fit of desperation, Michelle decided to confront Harriet directly. She found Harriet's phone number in Andrew's contacts, mustered the courage, and dialed. Harriet's smug, silky voice answered. The conversation was brief, tense. Michelle demanded Harriet leave Andrew alone, citing the unborn child as a moral reason. Harriet merely laughed, saying Andrew made his own decisions. She suggested Michelle focus on self-care and ended the call abruptly. Shaken to her core, Michelle realized Harriet was far from a passing fling. She represented a calculated threat to Michelle's entire future. The next day, Michelle tried once more to talk to Andrew. She waited in the penthouse until he returned near midnight, reeking of alcohol. She pleaded with him to attend counseling, to consider the impact on their child. Andrew's response was a cold stare, followed by a dismissive wave of his hand. He slurred something about living his life, and that Michelle should stop acting like a clingy woman. Heartbroken, she watched him collapse into the guest bedroom, aware that any apology he might offer in the morning would be meaningless. Inside her own bedroom, Michelle clutched her stomach and wept. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She whispered, "Please, baby, stay strong. I'll protect you, I promise." In the final weeks leading up to her due date, Michelle suffered frequent Braxton Hicks contractions. She anxiously counted down the days until she could hold her baby, hoping, in some corner of her soul, that the arrival might jolt Andrew back to reality. But Andrew had other plans. Harriet convinced him to take a luxury cruise along the coast of the Caribbean. He spun it as a business networking opportunity on a private yacht. Photos soon surfaced online of Andrew feeding Harriet chocolate-dipped strawberries, both smiling in the sun's golden glow. Michelle reached her breaking point one stormy afternoon. She was alone in the penthouse, rummaging through the final items for her hospital bag. Her hands trembled as she realized Andrew had not even left a car service arrangement or any instructions for her to get to the hospital if she went into labor. She had pleaded for him to be around, yet he left for the open sea with Harriet. A swirl of anger, hurt, and betrayal consumed her. She dialed Andrew's phone repeatedly straight to voicemail. She tried to text him, "Andrew, I'm 39 weeks pregnant. If something happens, how am I supposed to reach you?" No reply. Fed up, she decided to draft a letter, leaving it on his desk. She poured out her anguish, her frustration, her love for their unborn child, and her final ultimatum. She wrote, "If you choose Harriet and this lifestyle of betrayal, I cannot continue. I will leave. I will raise our child without you. Make a choice, Andrew." The act of writing the letter felt strangely liberating, but it also cemented her realization that she was truly, desperately alone. A wave of sadness washed over her. She placed a trembling hand over her belly, envisioning the life inside. A baby who had no part in this madness. A baby who deserved better. That night, she tossed and turned in bed, her mind spinning with what life would look like if she left. Could she move back to Boston with her parents? Could she raise the child in a stable environment, free from Andrew's toxicity? The questions tormented her. Yet, fate had its own timeline. The next morning would bring an event that changed everything, forcing Michelle to face the ultimate test of her strength and resolve. Michelle awoke with a jolt, gasping as sharp pain coursed through her abdomen, radiating outward and leaving her momentarily breathless. She lay motionless for a moment, heart pounding furiously, staring at the dimly lit ceiling of the luxurious yet suffocatingly empty penthouse. She glanced at the clock beside her bed. 4:12 am. Another wave of pain surged, stronger and more insistent than the first, stealing away any lingering doubt. She was in labor. Panic immediately overtook her as she fumbled clumsily for her phone, knocking it off the bedside table in the process. Her hands trembled as she retrieved it from the thick carpet. Hastily, she dialed Andrew's number. The call went straight to voicemail, as it had every other time she'd tried to reach him during his lavish yacht getaway with Harriet. Michelle bit her lip hard, her heart twisting in anguish. "Andrew, please," she whispered desperately into the voicemail, her voice breaking. "I'm going into labor. Please, please, come home. I need you." She hung up, tears welling in her eyes, mingling with sweat on her flushed face. Another contraction seized her body, fierce enough to make her gasp aloud and clutch at the sheets. She knew she couldn't wait any longer. She had to get herself to Mount Sinai Hospital immediately. Michelle slowly swung her legs over the edge of the bed, bracing herself as she rose unsteadily. Her body felt impossibly heavy, every movement an effort as she stumbled toward the bedroom door. Her hospital bag was partially packed, Andrew having promised to finalize everything arrangements he had conveniently forgotten amid his own selfish pursuits. Bitter disappointment surged within her, mingled with fury and sorrow. Grabbing the bag hastily, she shuffled toward the elevator. The hallways of the penthouse were silent, painfully empty, the polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers only amplifying her loneliness. She stepped into the elevator, gripping the rail tightly as another contraction racked her body. It felt as if her very bones were splintering apart, but she forced herself to breathe deeply, determined to remain calm for the sake of her child. Outside, the city streets were drenched in heavy, relentless rain, wind howling violently between skyscrapers. Michelle shivered, the thin fabric of her dress clinging to her body as icy droplets immediately soaked her through. She held her phone in trembling fingers, frantically attempting to summon a ride through an app, but every driver appeared too far away, 20 agonizing minutes or more. Panic mounted with each passing second. She glanced around desperately for a taxi, but the streets were empty, devoid of life at this inhospitable hour. Her heart thudded in her chest as another contraction hit, brutal enough to send her sprawling onto the soaked pavement. Her phone flew from her grip, landing in a puddle of murky rainwater. Scrambling forward on her hands and knees, she reached out to retrieve it, feeling the sting of humiliation and desperation simultaneously. Cars occasionally sped past, headlights illuminating her briefly, then vanishing without stopping. She shouted hoarsely for help, but her cries were swallowed by the storm, lost in the rush of the rain and wind. The city that had once promised her dreams and luxury now seemed harsh, unforgiving, cruel. Determinedly, she began crawling slowly toward the brighter lights of the intersection ahead, each painful movement driven by an instinctual need to protect her unborn child. Her body trembled violently, fingers scraped raw by the rough pavement. Her vision blurred from tears and exhaustion, but the thought of her baby innocent and unaware of the turmoil that surrounded its imminent arrival propelled her forward. Finally, as hope was beginning to fade, a lone taxi appeared around the corner. Summoning every ounce of strength left within her, Michelle raised one arm, waving frantically. The taxi slowed, the driver noticing the woman hunched and drenched on the sidewalk. The cab pulled to a stop beside her, and the driver immediately sprang from his seat, rushing to her aid. "My God, lady, are you all right?" he shouted over the storm, eyes wide with alarm. "Mount Sinai," Michelle gasped, her voice cracking. "Labor. Please, hurry." He helped her gently into the back seat, quickly placing her bag beside her. Michelle sank heavily against the vinyl cushions, relief washing over her briefly as the taxi sped toward the hospital. The contractions intensified, pain radiating fiercely through her entire body, but at least now she wasn't alone. Throughout the journey, she fought waves of agony, her thoughts drifting to Andrew far away on a yacht, blissfully ignorant of her suffering. Anger flickered again, mingling with profound sadness. She clutched her stomach protectively, murmuring softly, "It's okay, baby. We're going to make it." The taxi finally pulled up to the emergency entrance of Mount Sinai. The driver jumped out again, running through the sliding glass doors, shouting for help. Nurses and hospital staff immediately rushed outside, lifting Michelle onto a waiting gurney. She felt a strange sense of detachment as they wheeled her quickly toward the maternity ward, the glaring hospital lights overhead blurring into a white haze. Doctors and nurses surrounded her, offering comforting words as they checked her vital signs and prepared for delivery. But even in the midst of the urgency and pain, Michelle's thoughts remained fixed on Andrew's betrayal and Harriet's smug victory. Her marriage felt shattered beyond repair, yet a newfound strength filled her heart. In the harsh glare of the delivery room, Michelle knew one thing for certain. She would survive this, and she would protect her child at all costs, even if it meant facing the world alone. When Michelle reached Mount Sinai's emergency entrance, the pain was nearly unbearable. Hospital staff rushed to her aid, placing her on a gurney. Nurses and orderlies wheeled her to the labor and delivery wing, her mind swirling with adrenaline and fear. Where was Andrew? Was he even aware she was here? Dr. Hoffman, who had been her OB-GYN, appeared by her side, concern written across her face. "Michelle, you're in active labor. We need to move quickly." Michelle nodded through the haze of pain. Her world narrowed to the harsh fluorescent lights and the relentless contractions racking her body. In between groans, she managed to beg one of the nurses, "Please, try to reach my husband." The nurse left to make some calls, but returned shaking her head. Andrew's phone was still unreachable. Michelle closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. The baby was coming faster than anticipated. Dr. Hoffman confirmed that Michelle was fully dilated. Nurses flanked her sides, offering encouragement. The next hour was a blur of screaming, pushing, and heart-pounding urgency. Michelle gasped for air, tears streaming as she willed her body to bring this life into the world. At the height of her exhaustion, She felt a sudden, intense pressure, followed by a flood of relief as the baby emerged. A piercing, newborn cry echoed in the room. Michelle sobbed in gratitude, her arms outstretched, desperate to hold her child. "It's a boy," the nurse announced, her tone bright despite the drama. They placed the fragile infant on Michelle's chest. His tiny lungs wailed, announcing his presence to the world. Overwhelmed, Michelle kissed his forehead, tears pooling in her eyes. She whispered, I'm here, I'm here." A wave of emotions surged through her, love, relief, heartbreak, and anger, all swirling together. Andrew's absence was glaring, yet in this moment the baby filled the space in her heart that had long been hollowed by betrayal. As the medical team cleaned and tended to her, Dr. Hoffman gently touched Michelle's shoulder. "You did great," she said softly. Michelle looked down at her newborn son, a sense of fierce protectiveness sweeping over her. Whatever happened next, she would fight for him with every ounce of strength she had. Outside, the storm had finally passed. Michelle spent the next 2 days at Mount Sinai, recovering from the delivery. She refused to let the hospital staff discharge her too soon. Her blood pressure was a bit high, and she felt safer under professional care. Friends visited, showering her and the baby with warm wishes and gifts. But there was a conspicuous absence. Andrew never appeared. Phone calls, texts, and even voice messages from the hospital staff produced no response. A swirl of rumors suggested Andrew was still on the yacht in the Caribbean, oblivious to the fact that he was now a father. Michelle's frustration and sadness mingled, resulting in a numbing sort of acceptance. In the quiet hours of the night, Michelle gazed down at her sleeping son, whom she had named Gabriel, meaning "God is my strength." She chose the name to remind herself and her child that they had a power beyond the man who had walked away. Her mother flew in from Boston, tears of joy and sorrow marking her introduction to her grandson. She stayed by Michelle's side, helping with diaper changes and feeding. They spoke in hushed tones about the future. Michelle confessed she had little desire to remain in the city. Returning to Boston to raise Gabriel near her parents' support seemed increasingly appealing. Yet the logistics weighed heavily on her mind. The penthouse was still under Andrew's name. Could she just leave it all behind? What about her PR firm? And what if Andrew suddenly decided he wanted custody rights? The labyrinth of legal entanglements made her head spin. During her last night at the hospital, Michelle stared out the window at the sparkling lights of Manhattan. She recalled the early days of her marriage, the promise of a life built on mutual admiration and love. Now, that life felt like a mirage, replaced by the living reality of a mistress-filled yacht and an absent father. Still, holding Gabriel's tiny fingers in hers, she felt a surge of resolve. She had gone through labor alone, crawled practically on hands and knees through a storm, and had emerged with a precious new life. She might be broken and bruised, but she was not helpless. She was a mother now, and that gave her the fierce determination to keep going, to protect her child no matter what. On the 4th day, just as Michelle was preparing to leave the hospital, Andrew finally surfaced. She was in her private room, cradling Gabriel, when the door burst open. Andrew stumbled in, looking exhausted, and disheveled shadows under his eyes, and an air of desperation clinging to him. Michelle's initial reaction was a rush of anger. How dare he show up now after missing the birth? But her protective instincts flared, and she merely tightened her hold on Gabriel. Andrew rushed toward the bed, ignoring Michelle's mother's disapproving glare. "I got the message too late," he muttered, voice cracked. "The yacht's communication system," Michelle cut him off, her voice trembling with rage. "Communication system? You have a phone. Don't you dare blame technology for leaving me alone." She saw Andrew flinch. Good, she thought. He needed to feel the weight of his failure. Andrew's eyes flickered toward the baby. "He looks healthy." It was a pathetic attempt at fatherly concern, and Michelle scoffed. Her mother stepped in, her voice ice cold. "I think you should leave. Michelle needs rest. This isn't the time for your excuses." Andrew clenched his jaw, but before he could retaliate, Dr. Hoffman entered, flipping through Michelle's chart. She froze briefly upon seeing Andrew, then pressed her lips together. "Michelle is cleared to go home. I'm giving her prescriptions for pain management and postpartum care," Dr. Hoffman stated, handing the documents to Michelle. Michelle glanced at Andrew, reading the mix of guilt and apprehension on his face. She wanted to scream at him, to hurl accusations, but her son stirred in her arms, reminding her that the priority was to stay calm for Gabriel. Andrew shifted his weight. "We can talk in the car." "Let's go home." Michelle let out a short, humorless laugh. "Home? You think that penthouse is a home now?" She felt an undercurrent of quiet strength growing inside her. For too long, she had been overshadowed by Andrew's power and money. But after surviving labor alone, she realized that his wealth didn't shield her from heartbreak or abandonment. As the tension spiked, Michelle's mother carefully took Gabriel from her arms so that Michelle could stand up. "Go wait outside, Andrew," Michelle said, her voice firm. "I'll decide what happens next." She watched him leave, shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked smaller, almost pitiful. The question now was whether she was willing to let him remain part of Gabriel's life and her own. Michelle left the hospital that day, leaning on her mother's support more than on Andrew's token offerings of help. Andrew followed behind them, carrying the hospital bag, but his presence felt like an unwelcome shadow. The car ride back to the penthouse was tense, punctuated only by Gabriel's soft coos. Inside the penthouse, it was as if the walls themselves held memories of betrayal. Harriet's perfume seemed to linger in the corridors, or perhaps it was Michelle's imagination playing cruel tricks. Andrew tried to assist with settling Gabriel into the new nursery, but Michelle waved him off. Instead, she quietly closed the door, shutting him out. That evening, Andrew knocked on the bedroom door, asking for a conversation. Exhausted but resigned, Michelle allowed him in. He began with a barrage of apologies, how he never meant to neglect her, how Harriet was a mistake, how fatherhood had suddenly dawned on him the moment he saw Gabriel. Michelle listened with a blank expression. She thought of the countless nights she'd lain awake, terrified of going into labor alone, of how Harriet's pictures with Andrew had tormented her, of how she'd found his letter from Monaco. "I don't care about your excuses anymore," she said quietly. "I crawled to a taxi in the pouring rain. Andrew, you left me like that." He swallowed hard, tears welling in his eyes for the first time she could remember. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice trembling. "Let me make this right. I'll cut Harriet off completely. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, Michelle." She studied him, torn between the love she once had and the damage he'd caused. "I need time," she finally said. "And you need to prove you're actually here for Gabriel, not just on some guilt trip." They talked into the early hours. Andrew offered to pay for counseling, to sign a postnuptial agreement that favored Michelle and the baby. She told him she'd consider it, but only if he showed real effort. No more yacht trips, no more secret phone calls. He promised, tears sliding down his cheeks. As dawn approached, Michelle stepped onto the balcony overlooking Central Park, cradling Gabriel against her chest. She inhaled the crisp morning air, uncertain of the future, but steadfast in her resolve to protect her son and herself. Behind her, Andrew watched silently, a man on the brink of losing everything if he failed to change. For Michelle, a new day was dawning, a day shaped by her own decisions, her own strength, and the unconditional love of a mother for her child. In the weeks that followed, Andrew attempted to reconstruct the tattered threads of their marriage. He blocked Harriet on every communication channel, returned to the penthouse on a regular schedule, and showed genuine effort in caring for Gabriel. The infant's presence seemed to awaken a paternal instinct he had long buried under arrogance and selfish pursuits. Therapy sessions began with a marriage counselor, Dr. Simone Grant, who specialized in high net worth relationship issues. Michelle entered those sessions guarded, refusing to let her guard down after everything she'd endured. But slowly, as Andrew spoke about his pressures, insecurities, and regrets, she found a glimmer of authenticity in him. Yet Harriet's ghost remained. Tabloid reports popped up now and then, claiming she was spotted partying in Ibiza, rumored to be with another wealthy businessman. Michelle felt pangs of anger whenever she read these headlines: anger at Andrew for letting Harriet into their lives, anger at herself for not seeing the signs sooner. Despite the rancor, Michelle discovered a new wellspring of resilience. She poured her energy into motherhood, balancing Gabriel's needs with a partial return to her PR business. She found time to take calls with prospective clients. Even while rocking Gabriel to sleep, the tasks were exhausting, but also a reminder of her capabilities. Andrew and Michelle were not instantly fixed. Trust, once shattered, is never fully the same. But Andrew's consistent effort to rebuild a routine at home, rising early to feed Gabriel, volunteering to do diaper duty in the middle of the night, spoke louder than any grand apology. Michelle watched him carefully, sometimes letting her heart warm a fraction, sometimes putting up walls to protect herself. They decided to sell the penthouse eventually, opting for a townhouse with more space for a growing child. Moving provided Michelle with a sense of closure, a physical manifestation of leaving behind the haunting memories of Harriet's intrusion. Still, the future remained uncertain. Could Andrew truly shed his former ways and remain faithful? Would Michelle ever fully forgive him? Their story was not a neat fairy tale. It was messy, scarred by betrayal, but also brimming with a newly forged bond. Gabriel, perhaps love, underpinned by genuine change, might prevail. Or perhaps Michelle would finally assert her independence if Andrew reverted to old patterns. For now, mother and child thrived, a testament to Michelle's indomitable spirit. And Andrew, for all his flaws, stood on the precipice of redemption, knowing one misstep could cost him everything he once took for granted. Thank you for accompanying Michelle on her tumultuous journey, a tale of heartbreak, resilience, and the unwavering power of a mother's love.
He was the dashing mogul every ambitious entrepreneur wanted to emulate. She was the poised, loyal wife who had stood by him from humble beginnings. No one would have guessed that behind the gated mansion's manicured lawns, betrayal festered like poison. Until one day, in a flurry of financial sabotage, he let his mistress cut off his wife's credit cards. It was humiliating, scandalous, and only the beginning of a whirlwind that would pit powerful business alliances against each other. In a boardroom confrontation that stunned everyone, the CEO himself stepped in, but not in the way anyone expected. Buckle up. This is the story of love, greed, and revenge. Jordan Alberts was not born into luxury. He grew up in a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Milwaukee, where he learned to hustle by selling candy bars door to door at the age of 10. Over the years, Jordan's unwavering determination and charm propelled him into better circles. First at a local startup, then into his own tech company that caught the eye of an angel investor. By the time he was 35, Jordan was a self-made millionaire, a prominent figure on various entrepreneurial boards, and had connections with people like Mark Cuban, Bill Gates, and a few top executives at Google. His wife, Elizabeth Alberts née Wagner, had been with him through everything. They met in college at a small tech entrepreneur club meeting, both bright-eyed and dreaming of changing the world. Elizabeth came from a modest background, too. Her father was a retired auto mechanic, and her mother a homemaker. She'd studied communications with an emphasis on public relations, and it was through Elizabeth's network of contacts that Jordan first gained access to small local pitch events. While Jordan pitched his innovative software for automating small business tasks, Elizabeth made calls, arranged coffee meetups, and tried to capture the interest of potential backers. They married in a little chapel by Lake Michigan. It wasn't a lavish wedding, no star-studded guest list, no fancy reception at the Ritz. But to Jordan and Elizabeth, it felt perfect. A union built on genuine love, unwavering support, and a shared dream of building a life and a business empire together. Over the next decade, they grew from a modest condominium in Milwaukee to a stunning estate in Austin near Lake Travis, with a sweeping view of the water and rolling Texas hills. It was there at a philanthropic event organized by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that Jordan's name landed on the radar of top-level investors. His company's smart automation technology was recognized for its potential to transform not just small businesses, but large-scale manufacturing and logistics. Soon after, Jordan's net worth skyrocketed from a mere $5 million to well over $200 million. For a while, everything was picture perfect. The marriage was strong, their personal synergy unwavering. Elizabeth handled some philanthropic duties, organizing events, acting as a goodwill ambassador for Jordan's brand, and forging new partnerships through her PR background. Their household staff adored them, describing Elizabeth as kind, gracious, and always mindful of the people around her. But money can be a seductive force, and success can open doors to darker temptations. Jordan began attending more exclusive networking events in Beverly Hills, New York, and beyond. Elizabeth was often at his side, but there were times she couldn't attend. Perhaps she was busy finalizing the details for a charity gala, or maybe she was simply burnt out from the unrelenting schedule. It was during these times, rare at first, then increasingly common, that Jordan got close to someone else. Her name was Ava Monroe. She was a rising star in the world of technology law, representing high-profile clients like Tesla, Amazon, and a few top-tier cryptocurrency exchanges. She had a reputation for being ruthless in negotiations, seductive in social gatherings, and unbelievably charming behind closed doors. The rumor mill started buzzing the moment Ava was seen at Jordan's table during a private dinner after a tech summit in Las Vegas. Elizabeth wasn't there. She had chosen to stay in Austin, meeting with a team of female entrepreneurs Jordan was mentoring. A few people whispered about Jordan's visible fascination with Ava, the way he leaned in whenever she spoke, how they clinked champagne flutes with an intimacy that suggested more than just business talk. No one knew for certain how fast or how deep it went, but soon the signs became undeniable. Lavish gifts appeared on Ava's social media, including a diamond bracelet, suspiciously similar to the ones Jordan's company had once gifted important clients. Photos emerged of Jordan and Ava at high-end restaurants in Manhattan, always carefully angled to obscure Jordan's face, though keen observers could still identify him by the sliver of a recognizable watch or the faint reflection in a mirrored wall. By the time the rumors reached Elizabeth, they were no longer rumors, but near-confirmed facts. She felt her chest tighten, her world spinning out of control. This couldn't be real. Jordan had always been a loyal partner. But the evidence was too compelling to deny. She confronted him in the privacy of their Lakeview mansion. At first, Jordan denied everything. Yet denial quickly turned into a half-hearted admission once Elizabeth presented him with photographic evidence. Like a skilled negotiator used to controlling deals, Jordan tried to manipulate the situation, insisting that Ava was just a business associate, someone he occasionally had dinner with. But Elizabeth saw right through it. She had always been adept at reading him. A chill settled over their once loving home. Elizabeth, determined to preserve her dignity, demanded they enter marriage counseling, or at the very least step away from high-profile events until they resolved their issues in private. Jordan nodded, providing non-committal answers. He had never liked therapy, never seen the point in discussing feelings with a stranger. He agreed to her wishes on the surface, yet beneath the facade, he continued his involvement with Ava, allowing the illicit relationship to take root. This was the calm before the storm. For soon Elizabeth's sense of betrayal would pale in comparison to the massive financial and emotional blow about to come her way. Weeks passed. Elizabeth tried to focus on her philanthropic work and personal projects, attempting to distract herself from the growing chasm between her and Jordan. When a local charity she sponsored invited her to discuss future donations, Elizabeth discovered something shocking. Her personal credit card was declined. Embarrassment washed over her in front of the unsuspecting staff. She tried another card. Sure, it must have been a glitch, but that too was declined. The staff politely suggested she call her bank, and Elizabeth excused herself with a polite smile, her hands trembling as she left the office. Elizabeth called the bank suspecting fraud or an administrative error, but the bank's representative informed her that both cards had been cancelled the previous week. Under their joint account, they were tied to Jordan's finances, and evidently Jordan had authorized the cancellation. It felt like a punch to the gut. Why on earth would Jordan cancel her cards without her knowledge or consent? They had never had major financial disputes. Elizabeth always had access to family funds, albeit responsibly. She dialed Jordan, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent him several frantic texts. No response. Later that evening, Jordan came home exuding an air of tired disinterest. Elizabeth confronted him the moment he walked through the door. Under the chandelier's glow, which reflected in her tear-filled eyes, Jordan brushed aside her questions with a dismissive wave. "I needed to consolidate our finances," he said, removing his blazer. "You can use the joint checking account for a while." "No big deal, no big deal." Elizabeth's frustration swelled. "You cancelled my credit cards without even telling me what's going on. Are you punishing me for something?" Jordan's eyes flicked away nervously, and that was when Elizabeth realized he was lying again. The next words that came from his mouth were not only shocking, but also laced with a cruelty she never imagined he was capable of. "Ava suggested we revisit some of my expenses. She found that you were spending frivolously. It made sense to limit credit usage." Elizabeth's heart dropped to her stomach. Ava. That woman was now meddling in their finances. As if the affair wasn't enough, Jordan had allowed this mistress to encroach into an arena that Elizabeth believed was sacred, her own household stability. "What is Ava doing reviewing my spending? Since when does your fling get to decide what is or isn't frivolous?" Elizabeth spat tears, threatening to spill. Jordan made an attempt at a calming gesture, but his words only fanned the flames. "She's helping me restructure. Her firm has great insights into corporate finances. This is about the business, Elizabeth. It's not personal." Not personal. Elizabeth recalled how intimately personal their marriage had always been. They built every aspect of their lives together, from small decisions about wallpaper colors to big entrepreneurial leaps that demanded everything from both of them. Now Jordan was shutting her out, consulting Ava instead. In a quavering voice, Elizabeth demanded, "Reinstate my cards. I am your wife. I have a right to our finances, and you know I've never been irresponsible with money." Jordan's face hardened with a new arrogance. "Not until we finalize our restructure," he said, referring to some nebulous plan Elizabeth knew little about. I'll handle everything in the meantime. That moment, that cold exchange, was a harbinger of the bigger heartbreak to come. If Jordan was letting Ava control such details, what other aspects of their marriage was he willing to let her sabotage? As the days turned into weeks, Elizabeth discovered one more blow after another. The monthly allowance she used to cover household expenses had been slashed without explanation. The staff, including her personal assistant, was laid off. Bills began piling up, addressed to her name, but with no means to pay them aside from groveling at Jordan's feet. Friends and family started to notice. Elizabeth tried to hide her shame. She confided in her sister Caroline, who was enraged at Jordan. "This is financial abuse," Caroline insisted. "You should speak to a lawyer." Elizabeth shuddered at the thought. She still believed they could salvage their relationship, that Jordan would snap out of whatever daze Ava had put him in. Yet a small part of her whispered that maybe Caroline was right. Then came a fateful meeting at a hotel conference suite in Los Angeles, one that Jordan had insisted Elizabeth attend. It was a gathering of major tech moguls, including Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, who were rumored to be there to discuss new tech innovations in global logistics. When Elizabeth arrived, she quickly realized something was off. She saw Jordan in the lounge area, standing far too close to Ava, exchanging hushed conversations. Seeing Elizabeth from a distance, Jordan slipped away discreetly, leaving Ava behind. Elizabeth approached her husband with a forced smile. "I'm here," she said, desperate to maintain composure. "What's the plan?" Jordan gave a curt nod. "There's a closed-door session for the key players only. You'll have to wait outside." In the past, Elizabeth had always been included in these key player sessions as Jordan's partner and PR advisor. The subtle exclusion burned her pride. She swallowed her anger. "Sure, I can wait." After hours of waiting, she found Jordan and Ava laughing together near the bar. As she approached, Jordan's phone buzzed, and he stepped away. That was when Ava turned a chilling smirk on her face. "You know Jordan's a visionary," Ava said, swirling the wine in her glass. "He needs someone who can keep up with him on all levels: business, ambition, excitement." Elizabeth felt her face flush with anger. "I've been by his side for years. We built this together." Ava gave a theatrical shrug. "Maybe in the past. But times change. People evolve. I guess you were too comfortable." Elizabeth clenched her fists, biting back a retort. She was determined not to make a scene in front of such influential people. But oh, how she wanted to lash out, to expose Ava for the home wrecker she was. Ava flicked her hair behind her shoulder, noticing Elizabeth's agitation. "Things will be better if you accept it," she cooed, as if offering advice to a friend. Jordan's moved on in more ways than one. The finances are just the beginning. Elizabeth's body went cold. She realized in that moment how truly precarious her situation was. Ava was not simply a fling. She was positioning herself as a partner in Jordan's professional and personal life. The credit cards were just one step in what looked like a systematic campaign to push Elizabeth out of everything she and Jordan had built. Still, Elizabeth refused to crumble. She left the event quietly, but her mind churned with rage and heartbreak. It was time for her to take action. She needed to protect herself, her assets, and her dignity. Little did she know that as she plotted her next move, Jordan and Ava were preparing a financial ambush that would push her to the brink. Only fate and an unexpected intervention by a certain CEO would alter the course of their twisted game. In the days after the Los Angeles conference, Elizabeth attempted to consult with attorneys. She picked up a referral from a friend who once worked with a high-profile divorce lawyer in New York. The initial phone calls were sobering, with Jordan's empire being primarily under his name and her credit cards cancelled. She had limited liquidity to hire top-tier representation. Even so, Elizabeth pressed forward. She managed to scrape together some funds from a personal savings account. Jordan had no access to money she had set aside from her early PR consulting days. It wasn't a large sum, but enough to secure a preliminary consultation. During that consultation, her lawyer, Michelle Liu, a bright and empathetic but hard-hitting attorney based in Houston, laid out the hard truth. Financial abuse and infidelity are serious grounds for divorce, Michelle said, scanning through Elizabeth's financial statements. But if Jordan's funneling money and assets into new accounts under his own name, or shifting resources to places you can't see, we need proof, and we need it fast. Elizabeth swallowed. She recounted Ava's involvement, how she was effectively orchestrating the restructuring. Michelle's pen scribbled quickly over a notepad. "You have a right to half of the marital assets, Elizabeth, but it looks like your husband is 2 steps ahead. We must move quickly." The plan was to gather evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing and file a court order to freeze marital assets, ensuring Elizabeth had a fair shot. But as they began drafting documents and rummaging through what records, Elizabeth had an avalanche of shocking details surfaced. Jordan wasn't merely cancelling credit cards. He was transferring stocks from their joint portfolio into an account under his newly formed trust. He had changed the authorized signatory details for a few of their properties, effectively locking Elizabeth out. He was also taking out lines of credit against certain properties, presumably to fund new ventures that, as Elizabeth suspected, involved Ava. The emotional strain weighed heavily on Elizabeth. She couldn't sleep, her appetite waned. Each day felt like standing at the center of a storm. Yet if she thought this was the worst of it, she was mistaken. One evening, after finalizing some documents with Michelle, Elizabeth returned to her mansion to find her keycard didn't work on the electronic locks. Pounding on the door, she shouted for the live-in staff if any were left. Seconds later, the door opened slightly, revealing Ava's face. "Jordan's not here," Ava said icily. "You should call next time." Elizabeth's heart hammered. "This is my home. Get out of my way," she demanded, trying to push past. But Ava slid in front of her, refusing to budge. "He told me you're not welcome here anymore until the legal mess is settled," Ava sneered. "I have every right to ask you to leave." Elizabeth was trembling with fury. "You have no rights here. You're the mistress, not the wife." With a cold laugh, Ava stepped aside and pointed at Elizabeth's luggage haphazardly placed in the foyer. "Jordan left these for you," she said. "He said to pack whatever else you need and let security escort you out if you refuse to leave." Elizabeth blinked away tears, her throat raw with outrage. She was being thrown out of her own home by the woman who had intruded into her marriage. That moment was a cruel epiphany. Jordan had not only cut off her finances, but now he was physically pushing her out of the place she had shared with him for years. Yet in all that darkness, a sliver of light emerged the next morning. Elizabeth received a phone call from a close mutual friend, Marcus O'Donnell, who worked with Jordan at a large tech conglomerate in Dallas. Marcus was someone Elizabeth trusted, an executive who had known Jordan since the early days. He had seen them build the company from the ground up. Elizabeth Marcus said, his tone urgent. "I don't know everything that's going on, but I heard from your staff that you've been locked out. There's a board meeting next week. Jordan wants to finalize some big decisions. If you can get to that meeting and talk to the chairman, maybe you can find some leverage." Elizabeth's breath caught in her chest. The chairman of this particular conglomerate was none other than famed CEO David Hartridge, known not just for his visionary leadership, but also for a strict code of ethics. Over the years, Hartridge had invested heavily in Jordan's business. He was the reason Jordan sat on that board. He's not the type to meddle in personal affairs, Marcus warned. But if Jordan's pulling stunts that compromise your share in the company, Hartridge might step in. He's big on fairness and hates scandal. It was the glimmer of hope Elizabeth needed. She thanked Marcus profusely. The plan was simple: attend the board meeting, confront Jordan in front of Hartridge, and present enough evidence of Jordan's wrongdoing to ensure the board and possibly the entire conglomerate would not stand for it. She spent the week gathering documents, bank statements, and text message screenshots that implicated Jordan in unscrupulous financial moves. Michelle Liu helped compile everything into a neat folder. "You need to be prepared for Jordan to lash out," Michelle warned. "He'll try to discredit you in front of the board." Elizabeth nodded her determination, overshadowing her fear. She practiced her speech, reciting it in the mirror of her modest hotel room, where she had temporarily moved. Heart pounding, she told herself that if there was ever a time to fight, it was now. Finally, the day of the board meeting arrived. Elizabeth dressed in a sleek black pantsuit that radiated confidence. She walked into the corporate skyscraper in downtown Dallas, her chin held high despite the knot in her stomach. She spotted Jordan in the corridor, flanked by Ava and a couple of the board members. As soon as he saw Elizabeth, his expression darkened. "You're not supposed to be here," Jordan said, trying to keep his voice low. Elizabeth raised her chin. "I'm still an investor in your company. I hold shares. So yes, I'm attending the board meeting." Ava stepped in with a condescending smile. "Don't make a scene, Elizabeth. This meeting is for serious stakeholders." "I am a serious stakeholder," Elizabeth retorted, voice steady. "I'm your wife, still legally, and I'm half of this empire's foundation." Behind them, a tall figure approached CEO David Hartridge himself, a man in his 50s with graying temples and a firm handshake. He regarded Elizabeth with polite curiosity. "Ms. Alberts, I presume?" Elizabeth nodded, handing over her invitation papers and a letter from her attorney, which stated that she possessed partial shares. Hartridge studied the documents, then gave a curt nod indicating she was allowed to attend. Jordan shot Elizabeth a glare that spoke volumes. You have no idea what you're getting into. But Elizabeth did. She was here to preserve her dignity, her livelihood, and the legacy she had helped build. The meeting commenced in a sleek conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Dallas skyline. The board members sat around a large mahogany table, exchanging pleasantries about the upcoming quarter's projections. Jordan made a short presentation on a new partnership with a logistics firm, highlighting expansions and new contracts. A few board members clapped. Then came time for open discussion. Elizabeth raised her hand, clearing her throat. "I'd like to address some concerns about the financial structuring Jordan is proposing." She began, her voice reverberating across the silent room. Jordan's face reddened. Ava, seated beside him, tried to intervene. "We should keep personal matters out of board discussions," she said. But Elizabeth pressed on, raising the folder of evidence. "These changes aren't just personal," Elizabeth said. "They could affect company stability. Jordan is funneling resources into a new trust, making questionable decisions without transparency. I have documents signed by him with references to Ms. Ava Monroe, demonstrating a conflict of interest that could potentially compromise investor trust." A hush fell over the room. Hartridge's brow creased. Jordan, is this true? Jordan stood, scrambling for composure. This is a personal matter. Elizabeth is overstepping her bounds. She's not. Hartridge replied, his voice sharp. If there's a conflict of interest that threatens the stability of our partnership, it's very much a board matter. Jordan's eyes darted between Hartridge and Elizabeth. For the first time, he seemed cornered, uncertain how to proceed. Ava shot Elizabeth a lethal glare, realizing that Elizabeth's boldness had forced the topic into official territory. The tension was palpable. Elizabeth's heart thumped so loudly, she was certain everyone could hear it. But she stood her ground. Continuing. I also discovered lines of credit being taken against marital properties to fund expansions. These expansions could be legitimate, but the details are obscured. I have reason to believe Ms. Monroe is manipulating these finances for her personal gain. Murmurs rippled through the board. A couple members exchanged uneasy glances. Even those who might have sided with Jordan seemed rattled by the magnitude of Elizabeth's accusations. Hartridge steepled his fingers, evaluating the situation. I propose we recess for 15 minutes. Jordan, Elizabeth, Miss Monroe, please step into my office. Jordan inhaled frustration etched across his features, but he couldn't refuse the CEO's request, not without causing a catastrophic scene. The three followed Hartridge into a glass-walled corner office, shutting the door behind them. In that tense, enclosed space, the real battle began. Elizabeth laid out her evidence on the polished table before Hartridge. Jordan tried to dismiss it all as a personal dispute, but Hartridge was no fool. He could see the potential for scandal, especially if a partner was using company infrastructure for personal vendettas. Throughout this heated exchange, Ava attempted to deflect blame. She portrayed herself as a legal advisor, merely suggesting financial moves, disclaiming any wrongdoing. But Elizabeth's carefully compiled documents suggested otherwise. Emails, text messages, and proposed legal documents bore Ava's digital fingerprints. Hartridge's expression darkened. Jordan, this is unacceptable. If these documents are authentic, you've put your personal entanglements ahead of corporate responsibility. I won't allow it under my leadership. Jordan's face went pale. He tried to protest, to label Elizabeth's claims as overblown, but Hartridge had already made up his mind. Until this is sorted out, Jordan, I'm placing your proposals on hold. We can't move forward with any major financial changes if they're under this sort of ethical cloud. Elizabeth felt a surge of relief, a faint vindication. While she hadn't resolved the core issue of Jordan's betrayal, at least the board wasn't letting him run roughshod over her financial future. But Jordan, cornered and embarrassed, lashed out in desperation. You can't shut me down like this, he snapped at Hartridge, voice tight with anger. I'm the one who made that original deal with your conglomerate. You need my innovation. Hartridge stood up, bristling at Jordan's tone. I'm the CEO, and you've just made me question your reliability and integrity. Watch yourself, Jordan. Ava stepped closer to Jordan, placing a hand on his arm to calm him, but he shrugged her off. You'll regret this, he warned Hartridge, then turned to Elizabeth. And you made a fool of me in front of everyone. Elizabeth clenched her fists, refusing to cower. You did that to yourself, she said, voice trembling with both fear and resolve. Jordan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Ava followed quickly, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Hartridge sighed, looking at Elizabeth, who was holding back tears. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Hartridge said. I'm sorry about your personal struggles, but I have to protect the board's interests. If you need anything, contact my office. I'm not a family court judge, but I won't let Jordan drag the company down." With that, Elizabeth let out a shaky breath. She had achieved a small but crucial victory, yet she couldn't shake the nagging sense that Jordan, humiliated and cornered, was far from finished. She left the skyscraper, stepping out into the bright Dallas sun, uncertain but determined. Little did she know this chapter was only the start of a far more explosive confrontation, one that would involve security teams, sudden betrayals, and a twist that would bring Jordan himself to his knees. Life outside the mansion was lonely, but Elizabeth was thankful for the reprieve from Ava's manipulations. She rented a small apartment near downtown Austin and used what funds she had left to secure her basic needs, while Michelle continued to press for a financial freeze on Jordan's assets. In the weeks following the tense board meeting, Jordan went surprisingly quiet. No more legal letters arrived. No more credit lines were sabotaged. He didn't attempt to contact Elizabeth, nor did Ava. Instead, it seemed as though they had retreated into some silent fortress, likely strategizing their next move. Elizabeth took advantage of the lull. She reconnected with old friends and mentors, explaining partially at least what she was going through. While many were shocked, they offered support in the form of references, moral encouragement, and occasional leads for a stable job or a business partnership. Despite the heartbreak, Elizabeth discovered a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just a passive bystander in Jordan's world. She had her own capabilities, her own strengths. Slowly, she started consulting for small tech firms, using her communications and PR background to help them craft compelling pitches. It wasn't a fortune, but it was honest work that reminded her she could stand on her own 2 feet. Then one evening, she received a phone call from an unknown number. A crisp, professional voice greeted her. "Hello, Elizabeth. This is Patricia Carlson. I'm an executive assistant at Tesla, working under Elon Musk's leadership team." Elizabeth's heart thudded. She had met Patricia briefly at a tech conference in Berlin 2 years ago, but they'd never exchanged more than pleasantries. "How can I help you?" Elizabeth asked, mind racing. Patricia hesitated. "I might have information relevant to your predicament with Jordan. Let's just say some of our legal divisions have been observing Ava Monroe for a while, and some red flags have come up." Red flags. Elizabeth's curiosity flared. "You're investigating her?" A slow exhale from the other end. "Our major concern is that she's potentially engaged in insider trading, or at least something that veers close to it. She's been known to manipulate powerful men to gain inside info on deals, especially around new technologies. We don't have direct evidence, but we do know that she's heavily involved in your husband's finances. We suspect she might be siphoning resources for her own agendas." Elizabeth's mind reeled. This was bigger than a domestic spat. Ava might be leveraging Jordan's resources and connections to stake her own claims in the tech world. That explained the sudden shifts in finances, the new trust accounts, and the lines of credit. Patricia continued. "We want to bring her down, but we need more information. You, Elizabeth, might be in a unique position to gather that." Elizabeth tapped her fingers on the kitchen counter. "Isn't that something your legal team handles?" A rueful laugh. "Yes, but we need Jordan's direct involvement. We suspect he's unwittingly giving her access to confidential materials through corporate crossovers or joint ventures. If you can help us prove it, we can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, protect Tesla's proprietary data, and help you gain leverage in your divorce." Elizabeth considered the offer. It was risky. If Ava was truly up to something illegal, Elizabeth could expose herself to potential backlash, but the lure of finally getting the upper hand was strong. "I'll do what I can," Elizabeth replied cautiously. "But how do I communicate with you about this?" Patricia gave her a secure email address and instructions on how to encrypt files. "And one more thing," Elizabeth Patricia said, before hanging up. "People like Ava are cunning. She'll anticipate your every move. Don't trust phone lines or any device that Jordan has access to. Be careful." Elizabeth thanked her and ended the call. Adrenaline coursing through her. For the next few days, she scoured her digital archives for anything that might hint at insider information. Jordan's old emails messages about collaborations with major tech companies like Tesla or Amazon, documents that Ava might have manipulated anything that showed a trail of questionable activity. She found a few suspicious threads, forwarded emails from Jordan's corporate account that were CC'd to Ava's personal address. Attachments relating to Tesla's Project Next Gen battery were among them, though none of this was strictly proof of wrongdoing yet. Elizabeth compiled what she could and sent them to the secure email Patricia provided. In response, Patricia confirmed that these were valuable leads, but incomplete. "Keep digging," she urged, "and let me know if you get direct evidence of deals or monetary gains tied to these inside details." Meanwhile, Michelle Elizabeth's lawyer was preparing for a preliminary hearing to freeze some of Jordan's assets. She insisted Elizabeth come to court to testify about the financial abuse and the suspicious activities they had uncovered. But Jordan's side surprised them by agreeing to a partial freeze without argument. "That's strange," Michelle said, tapping a pen against the conference table. "Why would he agree so easily?" Elizabeth shrugged, perplexed. "Maybe he realizes fighting me will look bad in front of the board." But Michelle wasn't convinced. "I suspect he's preparing a bigger move. Be vigilant. He may have more leverage than we know." The next morning, Elizabeth received an unsolicited text from Jordan. "We need to talk, face to face." She felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: anger, sorrow, curiosity. But she knew she had to tread carefully. She agreed to meet him in a public place, a cafe near the courthouse, where she could keep the upper hand. When Jordan arrived, he looked tired, as though the weight of his troubles had worn him down. He offered a half smile, which Elizabeth did not return. "Liz," he began using the old nickname he once uttered, with affection. Things got out of hand. She crossed her arms. "You think—" He sighed, scanning her face for warmth that was no longer there. "I want to settle this amicably. We can discuss spousal support, property divisions, everything. No need for a long, nasty court battle." Elizabeth let the silence hover. She wasn't naive enough to believe him at face value. "Amicably? Are you telling me Ava is out of the picture?" Jordan's shoulders tensed. "This is about you and me, not her. Look, maybe I got carried away with Ava's advice. She's a brilliant attorney." "She's manipulative," Elizabeth cut in sharply. He brushed the point aside. "Regardless, I'm willing to compromise, but I need you to lay off this insider trading nonsense. It's reckless. You're endangering my reputation." Elizabeth realized then that Jordan knew she'd been snooping into his communications. Perhaps Tesla's legal inquiries had begun reverberating in his circle. She saw the fear in his eyes. He was worried, if not about losing her, then about losing his empire. "You made me the enemy," Elizabeth replied, in a hushed, trembling tone. "When you let your mistress cut off my cards and throw me out of my home." Jordan looked away, shame flickering on his face. "I didn't handle that well. But you have to understand the pressure I'm under with these deals." She waited, letting him squirm. Then he continued. You'll get a fair share. I promise. I just need you to stop meddling in my professional affairs, especially with Tesla or any other major collaborators. You'll ruin me if you do." A bitter laugh escaped Elizabeth. She thought of all the times she had stood beside him, protecting him, representing him before powerful players, forging alliances that were crucial to his success. Now he was pleading for her, not to ruin him. The irony nearly choked her. Before she could respond, Jordan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and muttered a soft curse. "I have to go," he said, throwing some cash on the table for their untouched coffees. Elizabeth watched him leave, a mixture of pity and disdain swirling in her stomach. It was obvious he was desperate, but was this a genuine attempt at reconciliation, or a ploy to keep her from uncovering more incriminating information about Ava? That question lingered as she returned to her apartment, drained. However, a new email from Patricia waited in her inbox. It contained an attachment, a partial timeline of suspicious trades linked to accounts rumored to be controlled by Ava Monroe. There were large bets placed on Tesla's stock ahead of public announcements. Gains in the tens of millions. This is huge, Elizabeth thought. If she connected these trades to emails or calls between Jordan and Ava, it could be the smoking gun. And while Elizabeth had no intention of going to the feds on her own, Tesla's legal team could bury Ava, and by extension, Jordan's complicity, if he was involved. Elizabeth clutched her phone, anxiety coursing through her. She was walking a razor's edge. One false step, and Jordan might retaliate more fiercely, or Ava might strike. But a successful strike against Ava could free Elizabeth from this entire ordeal, giving her the leverage to secure a fair divorce settlement, or even land Jordan in deeper trouble, depending on his role. She reached for her phone to text Patricia when it buzzed in her hand. A call from an unknown number again. Tentatively, Elizabeth answered. A man's voice greeted her, calm and steady. "Hello, Ms. Alberts. My name is Gregory Shaw. I'm part of CEO David Hartridge's legal counsel. He asked me to follow up regarding the situation with your husband." Elizabeth's heart skipped. Hartridge's legal counsel. "We understand from Mr. Hartridge's conversation with you that there might be unethical or even illegal behavior in play," Gregory continued. "The board is concerned about potential liability if Jordan's personal dealings spill into our corporate structure. We can't risk another scandal. Mr. Hartridge would like to assist you discreetly." Elizabeth exhaled slowly. She was on the cusp of powerful alliances forming against Jordan and Ava, but the more people got involved, the more dangerous it felt. Gregory concluded, "We'll be in touch with your lawyer. If you have any crucial evidence, Mr. Hartridge suggests you keep it secure. He wants to avoid a public meltdown, but he's prepared to do what's necessary to protect the company's interests, and that includes supporting you in your legal disputes, if it comes to that." Hanging up. Elizabeth felt a measure of validation. The cracks in Jordan's seemingly untouchable world were growing. Perhaps justice would prevail. Yet as she prepared to finalize the next round of documents for Michelle, a gnawing worry kept her awake at night. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Jordan, though once gentle and loving, had shown he could be ruthless when threatened. She braced herself for the storm that was surely coming. The next time Elizabeth saw Jordan in person, it wasn't by chance or a carefully arranged meeting. It was at the headquarters of Hartridge's conglomerate in Dallas. A sudden emergency board session had been called to address urgent corporate matters, and Elizabeth, having been notified by Gregory Shaw, arrived prepared. She walked into the reception area, her heart pounding with anticipation. Michelle Liu had insisted on accompanying her, but at the last minute she was called to handle a crucial filing. Elizabeth went alone, relying on the moral support from Gregory and the knowledge that Hartridge wanted the truth on record. Jordan was already inside the boardroom with Ava, who paced like a clad tiger. When Elizabeth entered, they both snapped their heads in her direction. Ava's glare could have sliced glass. Jordan's face was inscrutable, tense, angry, but also tinged with fear. Hartridge arrived moments later, trailed by a few board members and legal advisors. He wasted no time in stating the purpose of the meeting. Allegations have come to my attention that Ms. Monroe has been engaging in stock trades leveraging proprietary information from Jordan's company and potentially from our own collaborations. We need to clarify the truth. Now. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Ava's jaw clenched. "This is preposterous," she began. "We demand to see your proof." Hartridge nodded to one of his advisors, who distributed printed documents, timelines of suspicious trades, tied to accounts flagged by Tesla's legal team, along with correspondences that Elizabeth and Patricia had pieced together. Jordan snatched a packet from the advisor. His eyes swept over the page's color, draining from his face. Ava's lips thinned, and for a moment Elizabeth could see the faintest flicker of panic in her eyes. Hartridge pinned them with a stern gaze. "Jordan, you've been a valuable partner. I don't want to see your personal life derail your professional standing, but this is bigger than your marriage. Insider trading is a federal crime, and if Ms. Monroe is using your business resources to pull this off, you're implicated." Ava recovered quickly. She placed a hand on Jordan's arm, her voice smooth. "This is a misunderstanding, David. Anyone can align stock trades with corporate announcements. It's called speculation." Elizabeth decided enough was enough. She stood. "Speculation is one thing, but forwarding private emails, entire business proposals, and preliminary press releases is not speculation. I've seen the messages. You're literally discussing the best times to execute trades based on announcements that hadn't been made public yet." Ava whirled on Elizabeth. "You have no legal standing to claim that. You're just a scorned wife trying to sabotage Jordan and me." Elizabeth's blood boiled. "We'll let the evidence speak. There are even time-stamped emails from Jordan's corporate account sent to your personal email, Ms. Monroe, discussing upcoming expansions and product launches. Then trades were executed in your name or trusts linked to you within hours." A hush followed. Jordan's hands shook slightly. He seemed torn between denial and guilt. After all, the evidence was damning. If he denied it outright, he'd appear foolish. But if he admitted his involvement, he risked criminal charges and the wrath of the board. Hartridge leaned forward, his voice firm. "Jordan, I need answers." "Were you aware of these trades?" Jordan stared at the table, words refusing to form. Finally, he managed, Ava said it was all above board, that it was just normal investing. Ava let out a short laugh, but it sounded hollow. "If you want to scapegoat me, Jordan, think carefully," she warned. "We made certain deals in your name as well. Your signatures are on plenty of documents." The entire boardroom seemed to hold its breath. Hartridge addressed one of his legal advisors. "Have we sent this to the SEC?" "Not yet," the advisor responded. "We wanted to confront them first." Jordan shot to his feet, panic etched on his face. "No need to escalate it. We can handle this internally. If I undo the trades, repay any gains, repay tens of millions of dollars?" Hartridge asked, And that would just be the tip of the iceberg if the SEC digs deeper. This is out of our hands if they launch a formal investigation. Elizabeth watched Jordan unravel. This was the man who had once been so composed, so unstoppable. Now he was cornered, sweat beading on his forehead. Ava, too, looked like a wild animal backed into a corner, eyes darting around the room. At that moment, a building security guard appeared at the door, knocking softly. "Mr. Hartridge, you asked for security on standby," he announced quietly. "Thank you," Hartridge replied, his tone like steel. "I believe we might need you." Ava's eyes flitted towards the door, then back to Hartridge. She adopted a pleading tone. "David, you know me. I've handled legal matters for some of the biggest players in the industry. I would never do anything to jeopardize your trust." Hartridge's face remained stony. "I trusted Jordan, not you. And this evidence suggests you're at the center of a major ethical breach. If you don't have a verifiable explanation for each of these trades and how you obtained insider information, I have no choice but to protect the company from liability." Suddenly, Jordan snapped. Fear twisted into anger, and he pointed a trembling finger at Elizabeth. "You did this. You ruined everything because you couldn't handle that I moved on." Elizabeth steadied her breathing, preparing to reply. But Hartridge cut in calm yet firm. "Don't blame her for your poor decisions. You let your personal affair become a corporate liability." Something in Jordan cracked. He lunged toward Elizabeth as if to grab her documents or her phone, an irrational move likely spurred by desperation. But he never made contact. In a blink, the security guard stepped forward and intercepted Jordan, gripping his arms. "Stand down, sir," the guard said, voice authoritative. Jordan struggled, but the guard was a solid wall of muscle. Ava shrieked. "Let him go." "This is a private matter." Hartridge shook his head, anger coloring his features. "You just attempted to assault someone in my boardroom. Security remove Mr. Alberts from the premises." Jordan's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't do that. I'm on the board." "Not anymore," Hartridge said grimly. "I can and I will. You're suspended pending an internal investigation. Once that concludes, we'll determine your status. Now go and take Ms. Monroe with you." A second guard stepped in, guiding Ava toward the door as she protested threatening lawsuits and defamation claims. But her words rang hollow, overshadowed by the looming specter of an SEC investigation. Elizabeth stood off to the side, stunned by how quickly it had escalated from a tension-filled meeting to an outright meltdown. As Jordan and Ava were led out, Jordan craned his neck to shout at her, "You'll pay for this, Elizabeth. Don't think you've won." But the threat carried little weight now. In that moment, Elizabeth felt the mixture of triumph and sorrow that comes with toppling a man she once loved. She hadn't wanted to see Jordan destroyed, only to protect herself and the life they had built together. But Jordan's actions and Ava's ambition had forced her hand. Hartridge dismissed the board members, soon after instructing his legal team to cooperate fully with any investigations. He turned to Elizabeth with a sympathetic frown. "I'm sorry you had to endure this, Ms. Alberts. I assure you we'll handle it lawfully. Whatever personal or marital disputes remain, I hope you find closure." Elizabeth gave him a small nod. "Thank you. I appreciate your fairness." She gathered her documents and left the skyscraper, the bright Texas sun striking her face as she stepped onto the street. The entire drama replayed in her mind. "He let his mistress cut off my cards, but the CEO called security on him, she thought a bitter yet satisfying sense of irony spreading in her chest. She wasn't naive enough to think it was over. Legal battles would continue, depositions would be taken, and the divorce was far from final. But in this pivotal moment, she had taken back her power, standing against the storm that Jordan and Ava had unleashed. And for the first time in months, Elizabeth felt a glimmer of hope that she might in the end be free from their tyranny. In the weeks that followed, word spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up on rumors of insider trading linked to a high-profile tech investor, hinting that a major name was under investigation. It didn't take long for the rumor mill to connect the dots to Jordan Alberts and his mysterious attorney-turned-partner, Ava Monroe. Elizabeth watched from the sidelines, inundated with calls and messages from acquaintances, reporters, and sometimes even old college classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. She ignored most of them, preferring to let the legal process unfold without adding fuel to the media frenzy. Jordan, under immense legal and financial pressure, attempted to strike a deal if Elizabeth agreed to keep quiet and not testify against him or Ava. Regarding insider trading, he would give her a generous divorce settlement. The settlement included alimony, a hefty lump sum, and properties that would secure her financial future. However, Elizabeth refused any agreement that required her to lie or withhold the truth if subpoenaed. Nonetheless, she allowed her lawyer Michelle to work out a fair settlement that didn't involve perjury. Eventually, Jordan capitulated, realizing he had to salvage what he could from the marriage and business meltdown. The final settlement granted Elizabeth a significant portion of the assets, the mansion by Lake Travis, ironically, and a sizable share of Jordan's original tech startup. Meanwhile, Ava disappeared from the public eye, her reputation in tatters. Rumors surfaced that she'd fled the country perhaps to avoid legal repercussions, while others suggested she was hiding out in some luxury villa, waiting for the storm to pass. Either way, her days of meddling in Jordan's finances seemed to be over. Elizabeth didn't celebrate Jordan's downfall. She quietly grieved the end of a marriage that had started in love and partnership, yet she also felt relief and a renewed sense of self. She returned to the Lake Travis mansion, deciding whether to keep it or sell. The sweeping views of the water brought back memories, some of which felt like knives to her heart, others that warmed her soul. She began a new chapter in her life, leveraging her PR skills to start a consultancy focused on helping women entrepreneurs navigate both business and personal challenges. She named it Phoenix Rose Consulting, symbolizing rebirth and resilience. To her surprise, she found more joy in championing other women than she ever did, standing behind Jordan at glitzy galas. She kept in touch with Patricia from Tesla, who occasionally updated her on the ongoing investigations. Whether Jordan faced criminal charges depended on further evidence. But at least for Elizabeth, the immediate threat to her assets and well-being had lifted. David Hartridge reached out, once inviting Elizabeth to a dinner with the board, presumably to mend fences. Elizabeth politely declined. She had no desire to relive the tension of board meetings or navigate corporate politics, where her personal life became public fodder. She was grateful for Hartridge's stance, but preferred to build her future away from the chaos. In moments of solitude, Elizabeth reflected on the entire ordeal. She'd once believed that love, loyalty, and shared ambition could conquer anything. Yet she also realized that unchecked power and ego could corrode even the strongest of bonds. Jordan's betrayal had been a painful lesson, but it set her free to discover her own strengths and a life not tethered to someone else's rising star. Yes, heartbreak lingered, and healing was an ongoing process. but Elizabeth found herself waking each day with a sense of purpose. She'd gather with female founders at local co-working spaces, host workshops on media relations, and offer moral support to those feeling overshadowed by bigger players. Each time she saw a spark of confidence ignite in another woman's eyes, she felt her own sense of wholeness return. In time, Elizabeth would finalize the divorce, sign the deeds, and officially start over. A sense of calm settled within her, like the slow, tranquil waves on Lake Travis at dawn. Her story, the humiliating card cancellations, the public meltdown, the mistress's meddling, would become a cautionary tale, one she shared sparingly, only when it might help others. Despite the scars, Elizabeth refused to let bitterness define her. She chose growth empathy, and a belief that with the right support, anyone can rise from the ashes more formidable than before. Just as Elizabeth thought she had reached stable ground, fate tossed her another curveball. A month after the settlement, Michelle called her urgently. "The feds want to depose you," she said. "They uncovered new evidence Jordan may be involved in deeper crimes, bribery, money laundering. Ava might have orchestrated a network." Elizabeth's stomach dropped. Jordan never mentioned anything like that. "They've found offshore transactions and documents with his signature," Michelle said grimly. 2 days later, Elizabeth sat in a stark federal office, flanked by Michelle and 2 serious agents. They questioned her about Jordan's finances, Ava's role, the card cancellations, and philanthropic events that may have masked backdoor deals. Elizabeth stuck to the facts. She neither speculated nor dramatized. One agent, impressed, said, "You've been very helpful, Ms. Alberts. This case is significant." She left emotionally drained but relieved. She hadn't been dragged down with Jordan, but the storm wasn't over. Whispers followed Jordan was hiding at a secluded ranch, dodging the press. Ava had vanished. More subpoenas were issued. An indictment loomed. Elizabeth stayed focused on her consultancy, channeling stress into helping other women navigate business pitfalls. Her story, once painful, became a symbol of warning and strength. Then came the headlines: Jordan Alberts indicted for insider trading, fraud, and obstruction. Ava was named but still missing. The scandal rocked the tech world. Elizabeth issued a single statement. "I'm saddened by Jordan's choices. I've cooperated fully with authorities and continue to rebuild my life." Eventually, Jordan pled guilty to a lesser charge, offering a tearful courtroom apology. Elizabeth watched from home, tears in her eyes, not from triumph, but quiet grief for the man she once loved. Still, she understood consequences had to follow actions. That night, beneath the soft moonlight over Lake Travis, Elizabeth allowed herself one last cry for the past that died and the hope still waiting ahead. Life has a way of testing our fortitude when we least expect it. Elizabeth Alberts began this journey as a devoted wife, only to see her world upended by betrayal and financial sabotage. Yet what she lost in illusions, she gained in unbreakable resilience. Standing up to powerful forces and calling out wrongdoing isn't easy, but it's sometimes the only way to protect your dignity and your future.